help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to What's the Rush? I'm Rebecca Rusch, athlete, adventurer, storyteller, and your teammate on this little adventure where we explore within and without. And like the name of the podcast suggests, I'm really interested in taking the time together to look into the spaces in between the flashy moments, the finish lines, the projects that got produced, or the public persona. I want to go deeper than that. And so today we get to go on a very special adventure with my friend Dean Fidelman, who's a climber and artist, and really one of the most prolific visual historians of rock climbing and the evolution of climbing and its culture. He's been embedded in photographing the core climbing community since the 70s. And if you rock climb, you really know Dean's iconic black and white images that really have defined generations of climbing. And he's been at the heart of Yosemite climbing community, producing world-renowned art with some of the best and most iconic climbers in the world, like John Bachar, John Long, Lynn Hill, Chris Sharma, Dean Potter, some of my heroes for sure. And he's won a bunch of awards for his books, his films, and we can get into some of that. Mostly, Dean's a really good friend of mine. I met him in my early days of climbing. And so I wanted to talk to him today about the intersection between art and culture and sport and our minds and our bodies. And so we've got a lot to talk about today. But Dean, thank you for joining me.
Thank
I've
you.
been waiting for this. I can't I can't wait to go down memory lane with you, but also explore some stuff I've never talked to you about, like this concept of sport and art and the blending. So,
Okay.
I was inspired to reach out to you because I watched the recent docuseries called The Dark Wizard on Dean Potter.
hmm
And so that kind of brought me back into your sphere and started reaching out. And so it's great to see you again, my friend.
Yes, it's fabulous to see you again, Rebecca. Thank you so much for having me on. And I'm really looking forward to this. I really like what you said when it's what's the rush? To me,
Exactly.
it's a story of my career in a way. It's like there wasn't a lot of success throughout it, and so rushing away from it or rushing towards something else never felt right. It was simply a matter of sort of staying by that river and waiting for everything else to come by, come to you. And so I like that whole concept, and that's kind of the way uh, I've gathered images, and it's kind of the way I've lived my life. Not
Well, that
necessarily
definitely resonates.
slowly, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, patiently. I actually, it's something that's
yes.
come across when I first met you. There's a real patience in your style, even the way you speak, the way you move, and so I did actually feel like this was a really good place to have a discussion with you because you're a rock climber, and I don't think people think of rock climbing. Well, I don't know. How do you view rock climbing? What is it that really grabbed you as a teenager?
As a teenager, when I first started out, I think it was the people that really grabbed me and that sense of adventure, not knowing anything at all about how to really climb. I had a few friends that knew a little bit more than I didn't, and and I went from there. But it was for me, it was fully an adventure. It was a learning curve, but it was mostly those people. I immediately
Yeah.
felt a kinship.
I mean, you were embedded in the climbing community in the 70s as kind of, one of the really dynamic and golden eras of climbing where free climbing was really just kind of getting going. People were starting to climb harder. And, you know, it wasn't like rock climbing now that's in the Olympics. This was a counterculture. These were maybe people who didn't fit in somewhere else, and you found yourself with this group called the Stonemasters. For those who don't climb, do you want to kind of talk about that era and those people
Yeah.
and why they were gathered in Yosemite?
Yeah, the Stonemasters happened really in the very early 70s, 1970, 71, 72, right when I got into climbing. So as soon as I got into climbing, I was aware of this group of people, and it was kind of a loose knit group, but John Long was probably our leader, and there was Tobin Sorensen, Rick Akamozo, Mike Graham, John Bachar. We were all from Southern California, and our haunts were Joshua Tree and Suicide Rock,
Yeah.
easy destinations from the Southern California area. And then in the late springs and early summer through the fall, we would be in Yosemite. And when we got to Yosemite, that group kind of grew to include people like Jim Bridwell, John Yablonsky, Kevin Worrell, perhaps another dozen other people. And it was just what defined us all was this passion to one, live outside the system, and two, to climb, or like what I say now to people is Yosemite in particular is a cathedral. People go there to practice their religion, their faith. And if you don't want to say it as religion, people go there for magic. And if you don't have faith, you won't believe in either religion or magic. So it's a journey and a destination for a lot of us. And back then there was people had been climbing in the 50s and the 60s who kind of opened things up for us. And those were the people that were kind of selling us gear and giving us advice. And so standing on their shoulders, we kind of moved forward thinking that we were cutting edge. And of
Mhm.
course, looking back now, it's insane. Everything from training to gear to what's possible is so different. But we did feel like anything was possible. And honestly, in the end, it came true. Everything was possible. So that group of people kind of really defined me, and it defined how I was going to move forward in the future. And a lot of it had to do with, once again, being there. And
Mhm.
being there in the sense that if you're going to be hanging out with a bunch of really young climbers that have no money and sleep in the meadow and steal food and have general hijinks, which is how I grew up. As an adult male in my 40s, I was going to do the exact same thing. So I
Mhm.
slept in the meadows. I did what I had to do to survive and to not only document uh, my community, my friends, once again, but to start making original art. And that's kind of where Stone Nudes comes into that whole equation.
Yeah, I mean, you were taking pictures, but I mean, your images are always so striking, that it is this really, there's a intersection between the people, you, the subject, the environment, the way, the movement, like it's very different type of photography that I'd never seen. And we met at another sort of, really evolving era of climbing in the 90s when
Mm-hmm.
I came to California and was partially responsible for helping open Rock Creation, which was the first indoor climbing gym in Southern California. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, now there's climbing gyms everywhere, but this was like the start of that era. And that's where I met you, was in the climbing gym scene in Costa Mesa in LA. I helped open two gyms,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd been like you, kind of living out of my car, doing stuff, going climbing, living a dirtbag lifestyle. That nowadays, people are in, $100,000 sprinter vans and call it dirt
Exactly.
bagging. But I was, sleeping in a car, didn't have much money, eating tuna fish and, ramen noodles and mac and cheese, kind of similar maybe to some of your styles. But we met in that climbing gym era, where what was really cool that I saw happening is that it became the climbing gyms became a meeting place
Mm-hmm.
for all these climbers to hang out, and not everyone could go live in the valley or live in Joshua Tree, and a lot of folks had to have jobs. So during the week, we'd hang out in the climbing gyms, get to know each other, but the goal was always to stay fit to go outside, and the
Yeah,
goal was not to climb as hard as you could indoors. It was a community gathering place and with a purpose of going out adventuring. And so that's where I met you in that age, which was really
exactly.
exciting.
And we
Do you
actually met.
remember?
Oh yeah, we met
Do you,
actually through the 510 ad that we did originally.
that's right. That's right.
And
Yeah, it
that
was
was
a
a
510 climbing shoes, and they had
yep.
designed the first women's climbing shoe ever, your first
Mm-hmm.
women's
Mm-hmm.
climbing piece of equipment. And they asked, I was managing the rock climbing gym, and they asked me, 510 asked me to be in this climbing ad. I'd never really had my picture taken in that way. So, yeah, what did you tell me the setup and like, how, that gig, what that meant for you? Because I know what it meant for me.
It actually what it meant for me was, and so um, it meant a lot because the owner of the company 510 was Charles Cole, who was a friend of mine back in the 70s. We did a lot of climbing together, and we hung out, kind of hung tough together. And he always respected and enjoyed my work back in the 70s. So when he contacted me again in like the mid to late 90s and wanted me to start making some photographs with him, I was really psyched. And he gave me a lot of creative control. He liked the fact that I did black and white, and he'd seen a lot of my work. And so making those photos of you, basically, I think you were doing a pull up and maybe some other things, but it was all uh, taking what was currently in climbing media at the time and climbing advertising and trying to elevate it, bring it up a couple levels.
Yeah.
And I saw that that went over really well. And in meeting you and then going to the gym and talking with you more, I mean, you were like someone who was working on your own car. So it was like when it came to making these photos, the Stone Nudes, I believe you were the first one. Um, yeah, you were kind of really open to it. Like once we had worked together, once you had seen what I could do, and the other part was for you it was a performance, right? I mean, that's a completely different uh, aspect of what people don't understand when you're making a climbing photograph or even a stone nude because someone is climbing. It's the performance of your partner in that photograph. And I can't call someone a model. I would call the performance of the climber in that photograph is going to really dictate a whole lot of what you're going to get, more so than in any other kind of photography, I think.
God, there's a couple of things I want to touch on there. One, those 510 ads that, one, they were all women in the
Hmm.
ads. It was the first women's climbing product, and they were taken by you. So they were like these really classic, black and white, very artsy. It was
Hmm.
the show, and that might sound really common now, but at the time, one, there weren't women in any of the
Hmm.
media.
No.
Sure, they weren't shown as art, as revered, as really, celebrating how strong and powerful these women were. And so I have to give 510 and Karen Kent props for that, and you
Definitely.
capturing that, because that was really media changing. And so it was an important way that you were shifting how climbers were seen.
Yeah,
And
we weren't trying to sexualize or objectify anyone.
right, right. I
And
remember seeing that photo. I was so nervous. I was so nervous because I hadn't really been in like a professional photo shoot before, and there's like a studio and a whole thing and an outfit I have to wear and a guy with this big camera, and I was very intimidated because I hadn't really been in that scene before. And number two, it was like nervous about how I would look. Would my butt look fat? Would this be a terrible
Mhm.
picture? So I had kind of coming in with some baggage of like my own body issues or sort of personal issues about how I looked. And I'll tell you, um, I was, as a rock climber, I thought I was, big, and
Hmm.
overly muscular and not tiny and not svelte. And so that was that. And then going into the Stone Nudes project, you said I was really open to it. I was really scared of having my picture taken. One with some clothes on, and then also, of course, the whole Stone Nudes project was people were naked. They only had their climbing
Right.
shoes on and maybe a chalk bag. And so that, I'm even sort of thinking about it, feeling a little anxiety. It was really scary for me.
Yeah.
I don't sense that.
I think that I can understand. Lots of people have said, "Oh, it's just like I've never had kind of this kind of photograph made before, um, and I've never been nude in front of someone unless I've been intimate with that person, so on and so forth." And I fully can understand that. And so my energy is kept kind of really close. It's kind of really focused on making that photograph and understanding. Um, that people are afraid, when they take off their clothes. And now there's a camera there, and now they're thinking about not only judging themselves, but am I judging them? And what's this end result going to be? So as I remember that in that first photograph, and we've made stone nudes a number of times, obviously after that, but in that first one, we went through when we kind of blocked out the boulder problem, and you did the problem with no problem with your clothes on, your shoes, everything. It was not a problem. And as soon as you took off your clothes, I remember I turned my back so I could scout, make sure no one else is around. And I turned around and I'm like, okay, let's go. And you could barely get off the ground because you forgot how to climb for a moment. And then you were able to do what you needed to do because you were like, okay, I just need to climb, and that's really all you did need to do. And for me, um, honestly, people look, especially athletes, look the best when they're perfectly in balance,
Mm.
and that could be when they're applying power, when they're, whatever, doing something delicate. But when they're in balance, everyone's body looks perfect because everyone's body is now perfectly balanced, and it's my job or the thing I need to do is to find that angle of not only rock but body that shows you that balance. And so no matter no matter what you feel you look like, for me, everyone was born perfect. And the moment that you attain that balance, or the moment that I find my timing with how you move, I'm going to find perfection.
Mm.
And it generally works that way, it seems. More and
Yeah.
more, obviously, as I've done more. But yeah.
Well, I mean, you're putting people not just in stone nudes, but in rock climbing, and especially a lot of the climbers are soloing, they're not
Hmm.
using a rope that you're
Right.
shooting. You're photographing people who, um, you know, maybe don't want to be photographed or can't be distracted. And I'm really intrigued by how you have the emotional intelligence and the calmness in situations that are stressful or scary or fearful, or where people want to close off, but you somehow make them feel comfortable and kind of make you, at least with me, you made me forget. I just eventually just started climbing, and I
Hmm.
didn't forget that you were there. I changed my relationship with you being there by
Yeah, I
including
can see that.
bringing the rock in. Then it was kind of a threesome, I guess. You've
Hmm.
just come to this right now, but I'm really intrigued by how you manage that kind of three-way relationship, really, with the artist on the rock, with the rock, and then you being able to hold that so people feel safe in really sort of scary extreme conditions.
Yeah, one thing is I don't ask a lot of anybody in front of my camera. Now, I mean, obviously, someone with some stone nudes and someone who's not been in front of the camera, I'm going to ask them to move in a certain way. But working with soloists, and I started early on in the 70s working with Bachar and Jablonski and Luklinski and Maury Gingery. They were all soloing, and I was making these photographs, and I found that the best thing I could do was look for the balance points and look for their movement points. And that's when I let the camera go. That's where you're going to hear me hit the button. I'm not going to hit the button in between a movement. I'm going to hit a button where someone is climbing in a rhythm. I get into their rhythm. And the other part is um, holding your energy close. So it's not affecting that person out there. In no way should you ever really need to make contact with that person. You just need to be around your camera and then have an idea of what it is you want. And that's a lot um, of art and photography and athletics. And one of the intersections is knowing what you want. If you don't know what you want, everything you know is completely useless.
So what
So
did you want? What do you want to show in your art?
if
Is
you
there a
look at the
through
body
line?
of work, it's not
Yeah.
just the art, but if you look at my body of work, if you look at the straight climbing stuff, if you look at the portraits, and if you look at the stone nudes, what I'm trying to say is um, without art, you cannot have culture. And my culture is, and my canvas is climbing. The, the climbers and the landscape are that paint on that canvas. And so within that body of work, I'm saying, yeah, climbing is art. I look at it as like dance, very much so. And and art is part of the climbing culture. Hopefully you got that. Art is part of that climbing culture. It's part of
Yeah.
our culture and it's part of who we are. So that's what I'm trying to show in the work.
Do you believe that climbers are also creating art
Very much
without
so.
around? Yeah. Can you talk about
Yeah.
that and some people you've worked with in that way?
Yeah, I think that well, with Potter, it was very obvious that he was looking at what he did as performance art. And what's interesting, you may have noticed from the documentary, there's tons of footage, there's tons of photos made by a small group of people. And we were doing that not only because he needed it for his sponsors, but we wanted to share those moments and we wanted to share those experiences. So, um, working with Dean was doing it one way, working with John Bachar in the 70s. Once again, we wanted to share the experience. There was really no one that was willing to share it for us. The magazines weren't interested, and there wasn't a lot of media. But once again, it was all about sharing those moments because we could see, you can see within, if you get into climbing, within 5 years of someone getting the climbing, a generation has almost changed, and things have changed. Within 10 years, we got a lot of past history. So um, early on, I made those photographs because it was entertaining for me and my friends, and it was something that I could bring to the table.
Yeah.
And later, I realized that we needed to up things another level. And so when people looked at something, they could see it purely as art if they wanted to, and to understand that that culture produces art. Um, and that culture produces a dance, and those people have a common bond. Um, and I've been, like I said, I've
Did
been
you
really lucky with my career in that way.
did you feel like you had to capture, like at first this started, you took pictures of your friends, to
Hmm.
share the experience and show your friends the pictures. It was not a commercial enterprise
No,
at first.
not at all.
And then it still, it seems like the second sort of, connotation of your photography was then to capture history because you saw it changing so fast. Is that accurate? And then
Yeah, I think,
eventually it become a semi-commercial adventure. You started getting paid for your work, which is great.
yeah, there's that. I mean, I think part of the thing was when I came up with Stone Nudes was I didn't want to make photos that sold anything because I was doing a fair amount of advertising, and I'm like, I don't want to sell anything. I just want to do these photos, and I kind of like chocolate and peanut butter, and this is kind of chocolate and peanut butter, right? In a way, for me. And what I got into was, oh, this works, but you have to keep your energy this way and you have to walk this path. And so what that did was it allowed me to slow down and it allowed me to make my other photos when I was hanging out in the valley between hustling or running off to make stone nudes, to make these other photos that then became part of history or became part of that collective consciousness without having to worry about someone paying me to make those photographs. It's this is my life, these are my friends. Stone
Yeah.
Nudes, while it never supported me, it allowed me to remain poor. And I kind of needed that path, I think.
I mean, it's interesting balance how you did have to take some of the commercial work and get paid a little bit so that you could keep actually pursuing your art in a more authentic way off the job. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that like it's very accurate. It was much easier to find a young dirtbag up and coming climber to make a portrait of or to work with when you're sleeping in the meadow next to them,
Yeah.
right? Not, I didn't want to be a tourist with a camera. That's
Yeah.
something I'd never wanted to be. So living that life and walking that path, it gives you a certain credibility when you're talking to someone that they can trust you in the realm of making art, I think.
I mean, it's a really good point that uh, I mean, you've mostly been friends with or have had relationships with almost every subject you photographed. Is that
Hmm.
true?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something about you or either we know each other well or you intrigue me in the way that, you fit into my community or my world that makes me want to have that conversation. And that's what portraits especially are. But
Mm,
try with all my photos, they're a conversation
mm.
of what you are like in front of my camera, the intimacy that's going to happen in that conversation, that vulnerability that you allow yourself in front of my camera. That's
Does
that
this cross
conversation.
over? Does this cross over this type of, you know, balance of energy and intimacy? Does it cross over when the camera's not there and in the way you have relationships in your life? Like,
Uh,
has the way you shot taught the way that you nurture all of your relationships?
yeah, I think so in a way. Yeah, because I'm not always I don't always have a camera with me, and I'm not always asking to make a photograph. I think it's at points where there's a lot of trust that
Mm,
I'm making photographs, or once again, like that I feel like you're part of my community, and I want to show you as part of that community. So I reach out to you, and we make these photographs. But yeah, I think pretty much my entire like once again, everything that I try to do is somewhat deliberate, and the end is wanting to um, add to the culture and the art of my community. Really very simple things. If I wanted to make a lot of money or something, that becomes way more complex, and I don't think my head could really handle it. I
Well, you and
tried.
me
I
both.
wasn't successful at that. It didn't work for me.
So
So,
you try, I mean, you and I both could have made a lot more money designing our careers in other ways.
hmm
Can we talk about where you said you sort of tried to do that and go down the commercial
yeah.
route and it didn't work?
I think that for me, it was sort of obvious early. I was making these climbing photographs and they were quite beautiful, but beyond, and the magazines at the time, Summit, I think, and Climbing Magazine, when we sent them off to them, they didn't like them because they, one, showed soloing, free soloing without ropes, and two, they showed, pot smoking and general hijinks and like unwashed people. And I don't think they liked that. So so as far as any commercial possibilities, very early with the work that I really loved, and it's the first thing I did, and I ended up loving both the photography and the climbing. Um, was like, oh, okay, so this is not commercial. Uh, and so then if I tried to move it into the field of art, they were not ready for this at all, right? Art back then in the 70s wasn't this way. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess I have to figure out what commercial photography is. And so I kind of immediately gravitated toward fashion because you're working with people
Hmm.
and you're working with women, girls. And I knew a little bit of photography, but I knew nothing about women. So I figured that would kind of help. And within fashion, you work as a team. So you have the model or whoever's in front of your camera, and then you have hair and makeup, you have stylists to put the clothes on, you have assistants, you have a team, and just like climbing in a lot of ways, obviously. But what I found was they did not, uh, the trust that I had with climbers, I did not have within that industry.
Hmm.
Uh, Climbers, you could trust your life to them, and if you're hanging out on a ledge, on a climb, you're going to talk all kinds of life and kind of feel. For me, I felt real and genuine, like who I was. In the fashion thing, you have your parties and you have the people you hang out with and the people you work with, and then the magazine editors, and then you're always trying to move forward with what you're trying to do. And
Yeah.
honestly, if your heart's not into it, you're not going to be very good. And my heart wasn't into it, and so I don't think I was very good.
It
And
sounds like they were more transactional relationships than transformative relationships,
when it
that
when
you,
it came into fashion, for sure, and advertising, definitely, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So that didn't work. Um, and you went back to climbing, or that didn't work. So were you kind of, I mean, I've had stages in my career where I'm just like, well, I better just go get that office job or that real job or that regular job. Was that a point where you're like, well, okay, this didn't work. What
yeah.
now?
I was definitely, honestly, at that point, and this would have been sometime in the mid '90s, I think, early the mid '90s, and then I got a call randomly from Lynn Hill one day, and she's
Who's
like, "What are you
Lynn
doing?"
Hill? For anyone who doesn't know who Lynn Hill is, give us a
Yeah,
five
Lynn
second.
Lynn Hill is the, the greatest climber of all time, I think, for
Yeah,
what she did with freeing the nose. Alex
yeah,
Honnold is a close second for
yeah.
soloing El Cap, but Lynn not only freed El Capitan's nose, but she was also a three-time world champion, uh, rock climber in competition in Europe. She's was the first woman, I believe, to do 514, which at the time was the highest standards. That many men had said women can never climb this; they don't have the power, and she has the power and the technique and the personality to ascend and outshine everyone. So in my opinion, she's the GOAT. When I met her, she was 16, 17 years old, and just it was an obvious to me that that person was a natural and a one-off that you won't see too many of because of her abilities to climb and her outlook. But anyway, and she proved this all. And
Mm-hmm.
sometime after she had climbed the nose free, she called me and asked me what I was up to. And I said, well, I'm kind of making these dark photographs of dark girlfriends in dark hallways. And she goes, that doesn't sound like fun. And I'm like, it kind of isn't. So she said, I think that you should start making climbing photographs again. I think that
Mm.
that's why I called you. I think that that's what you should do. And
Wow.
I said, well, okay, I would be, yeah, I'm open to that for sure. And then she said, hey, well, why don't you come to Europe with me and roll some footage and make some photographs? I'm sponsored by the North Face, and they'll buy the the photos and the footage, and that'll kind of get you going again. So I did, and on that trip I ran into a 16-year-old Chris Sharma
Mm.
and his father, and we got along really well. So when I got back to the States, we gave everything to the North Face and they lost everything. I have no idea what happened to that trip. But
Oh.
Chris Sharma was living in Santa Cruz and he said, hey, would you want to go over to Europe next time I go over and make some photos? And I said, yes. I called his sponsor, which was 510 Charles Cole, and
Mm.
they started buying airplane tickets for me. So that's kind of how,
Wow.
the whole got back into it, and that's kind of where I was moving, um, and it was good. It was like, but once again, everything was based on a kind of a really personal relationship. I've spent way more time with Chris Sharma than I've ever made photos as friends.
Mm.
We really enjoyed each
Yeah.
other's company, uh, and when he blew out his ACL bouldering, I was there. I carried him to his car. I was living in
Mm.
Joshua Tree. He would fly out to Ontario. I'd pick him up, and we would just hang, do drugs
Yeah.
and hang. But um,
Building relationship. I mean, another one of the best climbers in the world, one of the most iconic
right,
climbers in the world that you're just hanging out with as friends. I
right,
I love
yeah,
that Lynn out of the blue just called you up and
yeah.
kind of pushed you.
She definitely pushed me, and then other people, that had all these other climbers that I had known since the 70s were now running companies or high up
Yeah.
in climbing companies. And they were like, oh, okay, yeah, you need minimal amount of money and just do what you do. And they would let me do that. So, I mean, like I said, I'm really blessed in that way, really very lucky that I had people that believed in me enough to allow me access. And then when I was able to get access to people, that these people became my friends, and we were all part of that same struggle. So it's like um, artists need to take risks, and athletes need to take risks. And honestly, the best way to approach any risk is one head on, but with a lot of creativity. So
Mm.
so you can maximize whatever reward you're getting out of that risk and minimize, whatever uh, dangers come with that risk. So in putting yourself out there, especially when you're making new work or especially when you're really thinking about, and here's another thing that I think athletes and artists have in common. It's like if you do not have self-honesty, you
Mm.
will never get to an elite level as either an artist or an athlete. It just will not
Mm.
happen. You could be dishonest with the rest of the world, but with yourself, if you lie to yourself and say you're something better or more fit or more creative than than whatever you want to compare it to, you're doing yourself a disservice.
It sounds like humility that you're talking about, and you've come across so many people. And I remember you saying to me at one point, I didn't really know what you meant, but you gave me a lot of confidence and pushed me in ways as well. And you said to me at one point, I was, doing a solo aid climb in Yosemite, and
Hmm.
something like, "You're the real deal," and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So kind of what you are saying in that the best like climber or artist or the best anything, the honesty with themselves, is that humility or
Yeah, I think it is. It's the humility to understand exactly who you are in that moment and kind of what you want, and go about getting that. With you, it was fairly obvious. When I was like, oh, here's someone who's going to get into an elite level. It's like you have what, five options in whatever it is you do. You could be bad, you could be average, you could be good, you could be great, or you could be elite. That
Mm,
last part, getting to elite, is I'm not there, but you are. And a lot of the people I've known, I can see it immediately. That person is going to be able to get there because not only physically you could see how they move and train or whatever, but mentally, it's all mentally. And that's what separates people like Sharma. Sharma, there's plenty of people stronger than Chris Sharma, but what he can do, it's what separates Lynn Hill, is her not only her creativity, but her mind allows her to perform when she needs to. Um, and so, and that's something I try to do when I get into the camera, behind the
Yeah.
camera, working with someone. It's that flow state that you can get into that everyone is really at a high vibration. It's not an easy thing to get to, but with experience and with the right motivation and with the right mindset, yeah, I think lots of people could probably get much higher on that level than they want, that they should be, in a way.
What do you
Um,
see? Can you kind of expand a little on like what you see when you meet someone and you can tell in because into or you can tell instantly because I'm sensing you seem to have this really high emotional intelligence, and so I'm trying to learn from you. Like you can meet someone and tell instantly, like a Lynn Hill or a Chris Sharma, or that someone's quote unquote the real deal versus
well,
seeing that they don't have what it
yeah.
takes. Can you be more specific on like what do you see in the mindset of those people that are elite that you can
Well,
tell before they do anything?
the first thing you're looking for is the passion
Mm-hmm.
and like so how they're going to communicate to you what it is they, if you know that person's a climber or a writer or whatever, how they're going to communicate to you their passion, like what it kind of means to them. And you should be able to get that simply by, asking a few questions about, what their commitment levels are in a sense. But you'll get that. And then the other part is how they're going to move in front of you and how they're holding themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people hold themselves back simply by how they hold themselves and how they present themselves to you. So, um, if they're going to look you in the eye, if they're going to, what their energy is toward you. If you can see
Mm-hmm.
they're judging you, if you can see they're open, once again, the people who end up getting into those elite levels, they're kind of like a sponge in a lot of ways because they're always trying to absorb what's around them so they can use it within them. And so
Mm,
you should be able to really get that feeling of someone
yeah.
and kind of pretty much immediately is what does this person want? You could
Yeah.
say, what do they want from me? But what does this person want? If you want to look at that, and you can say, oh, that person wants to excel. That person really wants to test themselves.
Mm,
And with you, I could see, and a lot of the stuff you did was really difficult. You did it alone because maybe you wanted the full value, but I think it was probably more like you wanted to see where your limits were. And you wanted to push and push and push and push until you understood what your limits were. And that comes from experience, but you can tell that honestly from a first meeting with someone or, first couple conversations with someone, like that main thing, what do you want? I don't want to have to figure out what someone else wants. They should be able to communicate that to me without coming out with an end goal. Goals are different, but what do you want? I want to meet life in this way.
mm.
Um,
So maybe
so,
more not what you want, but how do you want to feel or what's your approach more than a I want to be a world champion or I don't
hmm
know. There's nuance
yeah,
there.
yeah,
The
they're not,
between the
yeah,
goal.
yeah. Like I want to be a world champion. That's something like a 12-year-old kid, an adolescent will come up with, and I fully appreciate that. But
Mm-hmm.
a more mature athlete is going to be, oh yeah, I want to go as hard as I possibly can. I want to see what those limits are, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to be pushing those limits. And
Yeah.
if you end up being scoring the most goals or getting the most championships, winning the
Right.
most races, whatever, that's part of it, right? That's part of ego. But honestly, the soul of where it is and what that soul wants to do, that soul wants to really push those limits. and
Mm-hmm.
really wants to test themselves, and that's where the satisfaction lies. It's kind of interesting. I worked on a couple films in the last few years. The Dark Wizard, one of them. This other documentary is about the gold rush of 1978. The gold rush of 78 was a marijuana plane, a plane laden with marijuana in
Nice.
1977 was crossing the Sierra Nevada and it crashed in this lake. And in 1978, very early part, a bunch of climbers and other people went out to this lake. The rangers knew about it. They figured they would get it in the spring because the lake was frozen. But the climbers went out there and with ice axes and with chainsaws, dug into the ice and got all this marijuana out of it. And some of the marijuana had jet fuel on it, so if you smoked
Oh,
it, it would blow up. And they all scattered and sold this marijuana and came back to Yosemite.
it was a good winter. Yeah.
Yeah, a
You
very
could
good winter. And, they bought dinners for everyone for a while. Someone had like a used Volkswagen van. Maybe someone bought some new climbing shoes, but nobody ever made enough money for Hollywood to be all that interested.
mm,
And they asked me about in the documentary, so what's the end? How do we end it? What's the thing? And I go, well, it's like that. It's like that for everyone who was a part of it, they were a part of history. They were a part of this thing that happened that was outrageous, and they made a little bit of money, and it never really changed their lives, and they just
mm,
went on. But they're a part of a legend. And I think that in itself is its own reward. And
yeah.
why does it have to be, oh, they bought money or they got
Uh,
arrested or it doesn't have to be that. What it has to be is the experience was true and it was beautiful, and that's it.
I love that. I think about races I've done, or I've won this, or I've won that, and the that didn't really change me. Kind of to this point of, it didn't change who I was. I'm in a history book. But it wasn't just about that one thing. So I love how you advised Hollywood to end this true story and keep it true, and that
Right.
yeah, everybody just went on and went about their way.
Yeah, this thing happened and that was it. And so um, it's like what we build up in our minds, sometimes we have to let go because
Mm,
it's so different. It so unmatches reality that it becomes an impediment to just you moving on, right?
yeah.
You can't and that I see that with you with winning races, with winning, you win, you move forward, you continuing. It's not whether I'm going to win again. It's just like we're just moving forward on this journey here. And
Mm,
I think that's the same with long-term climbers that are going to be in it for most of their life. At some point, they understand that it's not about a particular climb. It's going to be about the climbing and the people. And,
yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah, you talked
um,
about, I did when we were, I was climbing in Yosemite and Joshua Tree, and in that climbing era for me, 90s and 2000s, I did
mhm,
do a lot of stuff alone, and I ended up morphing into other sports even now that I do a lot of those things alone. And it's not because I don't love community and crave community, but it's that part of it for me is that's where sport and outdoor adventure is an education. I know you
right.
say athletes are artists, but I feel like I don't know that I'm expressing art. I'm more getting an education when I'm doing these, hard things by myself.
Yeah, I definitely think going solo like that, you're learning a whole lot. You're learning about yourself, you're learning about your environment, you're learning about how you could do it perhaps better or with less stress attached to it. And but that's a very small subset of people that are in climbing and
Hmm.
probably in a lot of athletics because maybe you want to prefer to do this with your friends, and that becomes a much more community oriented things where you'll see some people they're focused on really pushing their own limits and really learning about themselves. I appreciate that, but that is also to me um, kind of the mark of an artist, and more so than a group is when that lone individual starts pushing those limits and getting out there because they go, yeah, I'm learning. Well, yes, when you're making art, you're learning as well. If you're able to put that down on the paper, whether it be uh, via writing or photography or painting or poetry, any of a dozen different ways, it's like it means that you've learned something more than
There's this
technique.
of the tortured artist that, everyone knows. And do you feel like artists, the best performers or the best artists in whatever craft, need to have a bit of an internal struggle or turmoil going on to actually be creative? Is that a prerequisite?
I think that once again, it's in the term of risks, artists taking risk, and for a lot of time, artists, you could say a risk is putting your work out there, and whether it's going to be embraced, validated, or rejected, or whether you need to put your work out there to make money to survive, something like that. I think um, is the same as any other kind of risk, right? Because once again, you're being very vulnerable to what is coming at you in a way. Um, yeah, okay. I've always
Or,
felt
yeah, go.
one of the interesting things about climbing is that we felt persecuted by the rangers in Yosemite,
Hmm. Hmm.
and because you don't have a lot of money, but you need to stay there longer, but they don't want you to stay there longer. You're sleeping out of bounds. You're doing
Yeah, you're
so.
squatting basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so yeah, that puts makes you that outlaw, right? And it
Yeah.
gives you that extra dimension uh, to where you can go, I think, and it needs to
Yes,
be the
that's
same
what I'm
thing with an
getting at.
artist.
Yeah, like, do you need the struggle? I guess that's what I'm kind of getting at. Does there need to be the struggle to produce the best work? And we see a lot of times in history, some of the best art comes out of really horrific, experiences like the Holocaust or whatever. And I guess I'm wondering, does it does there always need to be a struggle or something hard in order to really squeeze the most out of you, out of someone?
Yeah, I definitely think that if not a struggle, there needs to be, um, and I think maybe struggle is a good word to it. Yeah, to put everything together that
Hmm.
you want and to continue doing that regardless of whatever feedback you might be getting one way or the
Hmm.
other. Yeah, that struggle it's needed. And it's needed to show yourself that you can go much further than you ever thought. And it needed to show yourself maybe where your limits are or are not. Struggle definitely does that, right? And then the other part is like rebounding from the struggle and understanding that it's going to happen again and again um, if this is
You've
what
worked
you
with
want.
Yeah, and you've worked with some people that have gone through some struggles, and climbing maybe was an outlet and a way to sort of manage. I'm thinking of specifically Dean Potter,
Hmm.
and watching the most recent film Dark Wizard, that you're the main character essentially in the film. I would really like to talk about
Sure.
you being
Dean
that
was,
close well, you're so close to people intimately, as we talk about, but also somebody who was really struggling. And the documentary was great. I thought you were fantastic and really
thank you.
articulate. And you basically were alongside, really close friends with this person as they were going through their own struggles. Do you give it a little background on who Dean was,
So
and
yeah,
yeah, just give us a little
Dean
backstory.
Dean S. Spotter or Dean Spalding Potter, and we actually had a lot of nicknames for him, but we called him the Dark Wizard. So I met him in probably 1998, I think, in Yosemite. He had already been there for probably about 3 or 4 years, and he was a superbly gifted athlete and climber that kind of changed in a big way how people climbing Yosemite, how they speed climb, and he was also a soloist and a top end soloist that was always soloing climbs, climbing without a rope, that were very close to his limit. And he was also kind of like a really charismatic person in his own way. When I first met him, he was not very articulate, and then as he progressed in his abilities and his career, he became a lot more articulate. And well, so it was kind of fun seeing that. When I first met him, he was very curious about me. I don't think he had met a lot of like artists and probably hadn't met very many climbing artists at that point that defined themselves as a climbing artist, not a photographer.
Yeah.
Uh, and so he was curious, and he asked me early on, why are you here? And I'm like, society, I'm kind of a loser, but I feel good here and I can make my art. And and he kind of picked up on that, right? And we would talk for hours about art and like trying to tell him what I thought art, where it came from and what it meant to the community, and that I felt like he was more of a performance artist than anything. And and then, slowly over the years, I would see interviews with him where he'd start putting these concepts in because he believed in that whole concept of performance art. And we called him a dark wizard because of um, the penalty for his arts, his dark arts, like slacklining, base jumping, and climbing, free soloing. And the slacklining was without a leash, and base jumping, well, is base jumping. So the consequences are death for any of the dark arts. And so that's kind of what he was practicing, what he eventually ended up getting into. And okay, so one thing, and something I say never say in the film directly, is that Dean had a mental illness. That's for someone else to judge. Dean was my friend. Dean had some really dark periods of time. Uh,
Mm.
I've dealt with friends that also went through very dark periods of time. And I found that the best thing to do is to never judge and simply be available. And um, and also to understand when someone is simply trying to take your energy or someone simply needs you to be there. Dean was one of those people that would never take your energy. You just needed to be there and not judge.
Mm.
And um, and I can do that. I can do that because of making photographs of soloists where you keep your energy close,
Hmm.
and that's what you need to do. It's like Dean was one of those people who could feel what you were thinking,
Yeah.
so you needed to keep the energy close. And he happened at this moment in Yosemite climbing, very early 2000s, that was when things were really changing in Yosemite. The emphasis became less of big wall climbing, aid climbing, and it was really moving on freeing big walls. Lynn had free climbed her the nose in '94. Nobody had even touched it, and then really around the late '90s and early 2000s, people were making attempts on it. The Hubers had brothers had shown up in Germany. They were wonderful, bringing all the subbies and people with them, and they were assaulting El Cap, freeing it, and other people were doing long-term projects trying to do the same thing, free various routes. And so the energy was wonderful, right? And the Rangers didn't like us and they were chasing us, which made it even better because once again you had that struggle and that persecution. And Dean was like coming into his own as being able to articulate his anger or his passions. And so and everybody had no money. Basically, people were getting gear sponsors, right? You had shoes and
Right.
such. And
Right.
yeah, we were all sleeping in the meadow. So it was a really wonderful time when I first showed up, and well, he showed up, and we started that friendship. Um, and Charles Cole, who was his sponsor, would occasionally give me $500 or $600 to make a photograph, and that kept us all going. And yeah, and then seeing him get rewarded later on into his career when he ended up getting the first contracts with Patagonia and becoming a better paid climber. Um, like all that footage, all the stories that happened, it never happened alone. Like I say, it happened with all of us. I
Yeah.
was there with a camera. Someone was there to help rig that slack line. There was other people to help carry food up there because we were up on top of the Lost Arrow for a week working on a project. There was so many different parts to every moment
Yeah.
that that's what made it beautiful. But as far as our relationship and our friendship, um, because of the way he would treat people toward the end and sometime in the middle and the beginning, because of that way, um, I had to let go of a lot, and I had to never judge and never hang on to anything with
Mm.
him because he would feel it. And so it was
Mm.
kind of no matter what happened the last time I saw him or whatever our last communication was, the next time I see him, I'm psyched to see him. And I'm,
Mhm.
just psyched to keep moving forward. He ended up being like family, right?
Mm.
Way more than a friend, but it was like a family member where that
Yeah.
whatever issues you have, you need to at some point clear them up, right? And
Yeah.
so, um, and that they're always going to be in your life. And so that's what I felt with him very much. And
You have
uh,
other family members? I definitely know what you're saying, where you put up
I
with
have
your
a
family.
sister. Yeah.
Yeah, but do you have other people like Dean that the relationships that got that intimate, they feel like family?
Yeah, I had a few other, Backer was one of those to me.
Hmm.
Backer could be very arrogant and dismissive and in the moment. And I understood that. And for me, that was a matter. You had to let that go.
Yeah.
And once again, you let it go. Don't judge it because otherwise you're not going to be around that person.
Yeah.
And if that person means something to you, then you can stick their moods. You could get past that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really, I love this distinction of if the relationship's important enough to you, you see something in that person that really matters. You're willing to kind of put up with their crap and, let stuff go, like you said, more than you would somebody that you didn't care as deeply about.
Right. Yeah. And because you have this history together.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and also as you age, you've seen, I mean, hopefully we all work on experience at some point in our life. And if you have this history as you age, you've seen how things
mm,
can go. And you can go, okay, in the end, this person is no longer in my life. This person is no longer my friend. I
yeah,
don't want that. I
yeah,
want something else. And I'm willing
yeah.
to put the work in to get something else.
Mhm.
So everything happens after work, right? You need to put so much work into everything you do in order for it to flow, I think.
Well, I mean, it circles right back to the beginning where you said, you've taken your time with your art, your relationships, your career. Like, you have to sit and have empty space for
Yeah,
something to develop, like a relationship. It's so
yeah,
hard for
and
people not to.
yeah, it is. And that
It's
was
hard
one of the
for
things
me
with
not
one of the things with Dean, which made it so beautiful was um, having the front row seat
Mm.
to these things, even though you got a camera in front of you, the the rarity of being able to be there and to
Yeah.
make the photograph or to roll the footage or simply to, porter something at the camp, but to have that invitation to see greatness or to see something that's outrageous that you can't really wrap your head around, it makes
Right.
everything worth it, right? Um,
Right.
and
Right. You have
and
a front row seat to the sort of the grit, the glory, the hard stuff, the amazing stuff. You're
yeah,
witness to it all.
yeah, and you can and being at a certain level allows you that access to everyone and hang out with Alex Honnold, really understand who Alex Honnold is maybe for that moment in time. it,
Mm.
it's um it's something that took all the work for those years to get to that point where you become that person where they can open up to you for that moment, right? um, it's ultimately trying to be just that member of the community, right? Just
Yeah.
fully immersed in that, fully open to whatever is going to happen within it.
Embedded, yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you said about, Dean's mental health, mental wellness. Who knows if he had a diagnosed mental illness, but this podcast was really born from a really hard injury recovery for me, a concussion, four and a
Hmm.
half years ago. And I went through a pretty big physical health challenge, but also that turned into a mental health challenge and
Right.
eventually a crisis. And I learned a lot about how just like like a physical injury, we can have an emotional injury, and it takes time to heal. It doesn't mean, somebody might be sick for a while and then they get well. And
Right.
it's always a bit of and it's never stays the same, just like our physical health. And so I've been able to reframe and look at our whole health as it is this sort of ever changing, morphing things. And sometimes we're more well than other times. And sometimes
Right.
we're not well and we need some help. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Eh,
I just wanted to point that out and it's an area I'm working in with athlete, peer support for athlete mental health. And something I wish I had, maybe
Mm-hmm.
something I wish Dean had, at the time. So I'm glad that you talked about that. And for those who haven't seen Dark Wizard, it's amazing. You don't need to be a climber, artist, or it's just a really beautifully done film that tells a
Definitely.
really story.
100%.
And yeah, Dean, you did such a good job in there.
Thank- what was
So
interesting about that whole thing was, they came to me, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, right after Dean had passed. It's been 11
mhm,
years now, but right after Dean had passed, right before he passed, we had a meeting. We were going to make a book. We'd been
mhm,
talking about making a book for 3 or 4 years. And
mhm,
so we were going to make a book, and then he passes a few weeks later. And then I decided I need to make this book, that the book we're going to make.
yeah,
And, I started moving forward with that and got a writer and started sourcing photos. And I talked to his sister who had his stuff and was going to do a Kickstarter. Then the family backed out and I just said, fuck it. My way of dealing with him passing was to put all my energy into making this book.
mhm,
Uh, and then 10 years, or 7, 8 years have passed. Sender Film came to me and said, we want to make this film. We know you're going to be a big part of it, and we need you on board. And we talked back and forth, and I decided to go on board with the film. And I did these interviews. I gave him these photos. I saw the cuts, started seeing cuts like last December, edits of
mhm,
all the episodes. And it wasn't until I started seeing these edits that I'd felt it. When Dean died and the book died, I shoved it all back down inside like I do. Like I couldn't
mhm,
deal with things. So the best thing to do, I had a calendar to make. I had a life and I couldn't think about Mr. Potter. And then I do
mhm.
these interviews and I'm thinking about Potter. And then I see these edits and it hit me like a ton of bricks, honestly. And then the film comes out, and I'm supposed to be happy. I go to the premiere, and people are talking to me, and I just start wearing sunglasses and a dark hat, and like was depressed literally for the last 6 months. Now I've just gotten through that, and just like understanding that I was depressed and what I needed to do to get past it. But yeah, it really now that person became real again. And
You know, it's an injury that you never dealt with,
right,
and you didn't properly grieve losing your family member,
right,
and film and all that brought it around so that you could properly grieve and move on from it. The same happen is for me with, you know, losing my father at age 3. I don't remember
right.
him, but I never mourned his death until I went and did that big bike ride on the Ho Chi Minh Trail to where he died. And it became a way for me to, 50 years later, process growing up as a only child and losing my dad and not having a dad around. And so I understand looking back how you must have felt being forced to sit and review the photos and read the journals and
Exactly.
do an interview, speak actually out of your mouth articulately to someone about how you felt. Like it's a very parallel process that I had with making Blood Road as well, and
Mm.
frigging hard. And
Mm-hmm.
I describe it as like re-breaking a bone that had broken years ago and it didn't heal right, and you had to break it again and get in
Yeah,
there and like
exactly.
straighten it out again. And now it feels better, but in the middle of it, was that how you were feeling with sort of maybe re-breaking and looking at an old injury?
Yeah, I was looking at everything, and then, you end up kind of maybe second guessing yourself,
Hmm.
which it doesn't, second guessing doesn't really ever get you anywhere, right? And
About what?
parts of
Like,
the,
what were you second guessing
it's
about
just
Dean?
maybe how I could have behaved in some of the instances that were happening,
Mm,
maybe how I could have de-escalated tensions between him and myself in China, because really in that episode, which in China, it got worse after he finished the High Line and apologized to me. It actually almost came to physical blows, um, but it was something in me that uh, how far can you push me, right? And I guess I can be pushed really far before I actually kind of snap.
mhm.
But once again, I at the same time, I regret snapping, right? Um, it was just in those situations where, so in looking back on that, it opened up judgments on myself more than anything.
Mm,
And like, yeah, well, this happened and this happened, but there was my part in it. And
yeah.
so I had to look at that, I think, more than anything. And then the other part is simply really missing that person, right?
Mm,
And like understanding for a moment, like all of a sudden you can hear his voice, and then I could kind of feel him standing next to me, and he's much taller than me, and it's the whole feeling of having that person around. A lot of times I got that from that film because they did a really good job in the moment of describing him. Um,
yeah.
so, and so many other past relationships in climbing, from John Yablonsky, who killed himself in, 94, 92, to, you know, our friend Jose Pereira, who died in the early 2000s, right, to like Dale Bard, who died, last year, to all these losses in between. I've done the same thing for them. So the thing with Potter and going into that depression with Potter, I was like, there's a lot of unresolved issues in Potter. Maybe we'll just resolve him and move
Yeah.
that forward, right? So,
I was
it's
wondering, yeah, of you going through reliving Dean Potter and your relationship, and he's gone, and I was thinking about, all of your friends and people you photographed um, who are no longer with us, and that's a pretty heavy weight to, you get really intimate with people and then they're going to leave and go away. And you've got a lot of friends like that in your history that aren't with you now.
Hmm.
How are you, like you said, you're working through being depressed and going through grieving Dean, but you said you're better now. Like, how are you managing through the loss and the grief of those loved ones? Like, yeah.
Well, one of the way, I mean, I've worked in the last year, like last year, I did a photo essay on the new people in Camp 4, sort of the new Camp 4 for Summit Journal. So I met a lot of younger people on search and rescue and young climbers last fall making those photos. And then in the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of archive work, archiving Glen Denny, who was a really well-known climbing photographer from the 60s, who passed away 5 years ago now. I've been archiving all his work for his widow, Peggy Denny, and I also did a feature article for Alpinist magazine about Glen Denny's work. So,
Mm.
so that's kind of the way I deal with things, and I'm also working on another book about the history of the nose, El Capitan's first major
Oh,
climb with John Long and Hans Floring and a couple other people. So once again, it's like try to do as much, try to keep everyone's name alive, try to keep people's memories alive, try to keep them in the consciousness, try to let people know that our culture, who they were and what they mean to our culture is the most I can do to personally heal in a way, right? Because it kind of feels like it's like what the scars are the scars, but when I come out with a book about Yosemite in the 50s and I met these guys that were old enough to be my father, you know, um,
yeah.
and I told them personally I was going to respect your legacy and bring your legacy forward. And then once that book came out and they told me thank you, right? And the same with the Stonemasters book, people would say thank you. And I'm like, well, thank you for your story. It's yours,
Mm.
it's not mine, right? Um, that to me is healing.
That you're coming full circle. We're talking about how you found photography and community and climbing as a teenager and how that healed you then. And you're giving me exactly the same formula
Right.
now, decades later of like what healed me, what fuels me, what makes me passionate is recording history, being with my community, being out in nature, and so it's exactly the same story from, the whole arc of your life.
Yeah, well,
It's
I
really,
do try to keep it simple because I am stupid. So,
I don't know, Dean. I mean, you're really, yeah, you've changed a lot of lives. You've changed mine. You've recorded history, and I love that you're now also recording the young people in Camp 4 right now. Like that history is now, you're moving into the future. Not just talking about the past. I think
oh
it's really
yeah,
special.
and they're amazing. Like the Generation Z, I don't know what people want to say about them, but Generation Z is like one of the most intelligent and one of the most open
Yeah,
generations
that's
I've ever seen
yeah.
and met.
I
Yeah,
think that is awesome, and I love the sort of intergenerational relationships that I think are so important for the young people to learn from people like us, and for us to continue to learn, kind of as you said earlier, being a sponge and continuing basically to be a leader and a learner, a giver and a receiver, if we can.
yeah. I think that's the thing, especially with athletes, uh, climbers, riders, anybody is learn your history. And if
Hmm.
you learn your history, if you learn your culture and your art, it will allow you to push yourself and that culture much further than you can imagine, right? And it's simply because from the very beginning, you were standing on someone else's shoulders. You should look down between your feet and say hello to that person. And the way you do that is by learning your history and respecting your culture.
Yeah. Well, Dean, thank you basically being the historian for rock climbing for, I don't know, going on 6 decades, 5 decades.
Yeah, 5 decades
Yeah.
of it, pretty much. Yeah, and the last couple of
Yeah.
decades hitting it harder with getting books and that kind of stuff published. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's also
I
part of the
am.
struggle, isn't it wonderful?
I mean, I love your evolution. I mean, I feel a kindred spirit because we're both, being creative and evolving to be able to continue to work and be in the spaces that we love. And I know it takes a lot of creativity. And we are going to link and point to all your books and your films and, such an amazing body of work. And
Thank you.
for anyone who's curious, we probably will publish those stone nude images of me young climber. And we talked a little bit at the beginning of, I was real sensitive about having my photo taken, and I want to thank you for, giving me the confidence to be myself, in
Well,
that moment. And it's a big lesson that I've learned from you is to just be yourself, because it's pretty darn good as we are, right? For all of
uh,
us.
I want to thank you for actually proving me right when I said you were the real deal and that you had a heart of a champion. I knew it, right? I just needed you to prove it to me, which you
Well,
did
it's like
quite well.
you needed Lynn Hill to give you a nudge. We all need other people to be a reflection, because often our
Hmm.
own look in the mirror isn't as accurate as a friend looking from the outside. So, last question. I could
Yeah.
talk to you forever, but the last question is really kind of related back to the name of this podcast. What's the rush, Dean? Is there something you're working on, slowing the pace of editing? Taking time with in your life right now?
Yeah, very much so. I kind of really, I'm 70. I have slowed down since I don't have any um, projects that I have to do to eat, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I'm kind of picking these things. And so I've been working on this book. I call it Valley Muse, and it's just kind of nudes in Yosemite. It's color, black and white, and all that stuff. And I was telling myself the other day, I'm like, oh man, you didn't get a lot of photos done this spring. You really need to, push it a little bit more to get stuff done this fall. And I'm like, you know something? I'm not leaving anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. If my history
Yeah.
shows anything, what's the
Yeah.
rush? There is none. I'll
You're
get there.
staying put in Yosemite. I love it. And it would be a dream for me to actually, I could use a new portrait. So it would
Oh,
be a
you
dream
should.
to come and spend some time together again.
Yeah, you definitely should come here. I'm caretaker at Hans Floring's place, so there's plenty of space, and yeah, I would love that. That would be
Hey,
fabulous.
Hans Loring doesn't know it yet, but we're gonna have a reunion at his house with you. So Dean Fidelman, thank you so much for your time. For all of you who are listening to this amazing conversation, thanks for tuning in. I hope you took some great nuggets. And yeah, I'll make sure you can find all of Dean's resources and how to connect with him. And thanks again for being here, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode of What's the Rush?
Thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, it's a long and dusty road and a hot and heavy load. Folks I meet ain't always kind. Some are bad, some are good, some have done the best they could. Some have tried to ease my troubling mind. And I can't help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.